Hi, my name is Orville. I'm 78, a retired professor, and I thought I'd earned a peaceful final chapter in the home I built with my wife, Alta. But lately, the walls feel like they're whispering a different truth. My son says I'm transitioning. My granddaughter's school recital thanked everyone, except me. And the other day, my old friend showed up with groceries, because he heard I was dead. How does a man disappear while still living under his own roof? And more importantly, why is no one stopping it? I didn't expect them that Thursday afternoon, Lowell and Marla, standing on my porch like two realtors ready to pitch a dream I never asked for. Lowell had that practiced grin on, the one he used when he was trying to sound considerate without really meaning it. Marla held a paper bag of groceries in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. It wasn't even close to a holiday. "We figured we'd drop by," he said, stepping in like it was still his childhood home. "Been thinking about you, Dad. About your future." The words hung in the air, just long enough to leave a taste. We settled in the kitchen. They unpacked things with a kind of nervous energy. Cheese, crackers, kale, of all things. I just sat at the table, hands wrapped around my coffee mug, watching them move around my kitchen like they owned it already. Lowell leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You've got a lot of space here, Dad. More than you need, really. And this house, well, it could be a burden." That's when he dropped it. "If you give me the house now, I'll take care of you, forever. You won't have to worry about anything." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I studied his face. He looked like a man reading from a script someone else wrote. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan. It squeaked in a familiar rhythm, like it had for decades. I thought about Alta, her voice, the way she used to hum while folding laundry, her quiet way of making every room feel like home. This place was our story. Every crack in the floorboard had a memory. Still, I couldn't dismiss what Lowell said. Was it so wrong to consider simplifying things? Maybe I was clinging too hard to the past. But then again, there was a difference between letting go and being erased. Emmeline had been quiet the whole visit. She'd sat on the couch, eyes glued to her phone. But I caught her glance at me more than once. And when I looked back, she quickly turned away. There was something in her silence I couldn't quite place. Worry, maybe, or shame. 2 days later, Kent came by. I'd called him that morning, after sleeping on it, if you can call tossing and turning sleep. I told him I wanted to make it easy for everyone, to draw up something simple. He nodded, like he'd seen this play out too many times already. We sat in my den, the three of us. Lowell talked about saving on taxes, Marla about protecting assets. I barely listened. I just wanted it done. Kent pulled out a standard living arrangement agreement. I'd retain the right to live in the house for the rest of my life. Lowell would take ownership, and the house would eventually pass to him officially. I signed. Lowell reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "You won't regret this, Dad. We'll make sure everything's taken care of." I wanted to believe him. A week later, I stopped by the bank to sort out a routine billing error. Darryl, a young man with polite eyes, typed my name into the system, then paused. "I'm sorry, sir, but it looks like your name isn't listed on the property account anymore. All statements are being forwarded to a Lowell Herald." I stood there, nodding slowly. I didn't argue. I just thanked him, left the bank, and sat in my truck for a long while. There it was, that first real, quiet flicker of something shifting. Not rage, not yet, just a hollowing. That afternoon, back at the house, I noticed a large, rolled-up sheet pinned near the hallway mirror. It hadn't been there before. I unpinned it and let it unfurl. A floor plan. Marla's handwriting labeled each room with fresh purpose. Open Concept Lounge. Modern Media Hub. But my study, my room, my corner with the bookshelves and typewriter, was labeled in bold red marker. Grandpa's storage. That word sat in my chest like wet cement. Storage. Not office. Not reading room. Just a space for things no one wanted in sight but couldn't quite throw away. I hung the plan back up and walked to my room. I shut the door and turned the lock, out of habit, not fear. Later that evening, I opened Alta's journal. the one she left half filled. I wrote one line on the next empty page. They said I'd always have a place here. They just never said where. 2 mornings after signing the papers, I opened the mailbox like I had for 34 years. It felt heavier that day, though it held only one envelope. It was printed in bulk ink, addressed not to me, not even to a Mr. Harrell, just current resident. I stood there, unmoving, the cold air curling around my ankles. For more than 3 decades, my name had lived here, on the deed, on every letter that passed through this old box. And now it was gone. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. Something promotional. Probably. But the message had already been delivered. I slid it under a stack of grocery receipts and utility bills on the hallway table and went about my morning, pretending I wasn't rattled. But in the quiet, that letter screamed louder than anything Marla or Lowell had said out loud. By the afternoon, the house was still. Marla and Lowell had gone out to run errands, which lately meant anything they didn't want to explain. As I passed the living room on the way to refill my tea, something caught my eye. A rolled-up tube poked from the top of Marla's leather portfolio, left leaning by the wall. I don't know what made me stop. Curiosity, instinct, or just plain dread. I pulled the poster out and unrolled it carefully on the coffee table. A sleek floor plan stared back at me, lines clean as bone. The old kitchen walls were missing, labeled now as Open Concept Gallery. The dining room had become interactive hosting space, but what stopped me cold was the label in bright red marker scribbled where my study used to be. Grandpa's storage. They hadn't even tried to hide it. I ran a finger over the ink, as if touching it would change it back to what it had always been. I rolled the paper up slowly and slid it back. But the words stayed burned into the back of my mind, as loud as neon. Later that evening, I heard laughter drifting from the dining room. Marla had invited some colleagues over, people who smelled of scented candles and wore eyeglasses with no prescription. I wasn't asked to join, but I walked in anyway, out of stubbornness more than appetite. The table was already full. Glasses clinked. Buzzwords floated like perfume. One of the guests, a man with a navy blazer and overly white teeth, glanced at me. "So you're the caretaker?" he asked. Marla laughed lightly, a shade too high-pitched. "Oh, he's family. He's just staying with us while we finish the redesign." No one said anything after that. The conversation shifted to wallpaper palettes and light fixtures. I stood there for another full minute, then turned and left without a word. No one noticed. That night, the silence in my room wasn't comforting. It was loaded. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months and pulled out an old photograph. Alta, sitting by the living room window, sun pouring onto her lap as she read her mystery novels. I heard her voice in my head, soft, amused. Never let your legacy be wallpapered over. That house, her garden, the floors we refinished by hand, all of it was being gutted in the name of vision boards and property value. I pulled out a small notebook and began to write, not to lash out, not yet, just to document, a ledger of quiet disappearances, a catalog of things taken before anyone admitted they were stealing, before sunrise. I made coffee the way Alta used to like it, black, no sugar. I sat at the kitchen table as Emmeline entered, school bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't say anything, just pulled out a trifold project board and slid it across to me. It was her family tree. Her name was there, in bold letters. Below hers were Marla and Lowell, framed with glitter and stars. There was no branch for me. I didn't ask why. She didn't explain. She packed it away quickly after, kissed my cheek without looking me in the eye, and left for school. The house felt colder after the door shut. It was a Saturday morning when Emmeline poked her head into my room. "Grandpa, can you help me with something for school?" she asked, holding a rolled poster board against her chest. I nodded and followed her into the dining room, where she'd already spread markers, glue, and printed photos across the table. "We're doing family trees," she said, smiling. "Mine's almost done." She pointed out the branches, proud of her work. Lowell, Marla, herself, even some distant cousins from Oregon. Each name was neatly written in block letters, with tiny cutouts of faces glued beside them. But as my eyes traced the lines, I realized something was missing. My branch wasn't there. Not my name, not my face. I tried not to show it. Looks like you've got most of the family in there. She glanced up, a flicker of guilt in her expression. We were short on space, Grandpa. I'll add you next time. Promise. I nodded. Of course. But something inside me folded inward, like a dry leaf pressed between book pages. Later that day, I opened the box in the closet I hadn't touched since the first winter after Alta passed. I kept it labeled simply, Alta. The scent of cedar greeted me. Her handwriting peeked from the edges of old birthday cards and church bulletins. At the bottom, wrapped in yellowing tissue, was the photograph, us, under the elm tree in the backyard, on our 40th anniversary. She was laughing, head tilted back, and I was holding up a glass of lemonade like it was champagne. Her voice echoed in my memory, soft but pointed. Be wary of those who take before they ask. That photo used to hang in the hallway, right outside the kitchen. A few weeks ago, Marla replaced it with a canvas print of blue and gray brush strokes. Modern feel, she said. I didn't argue, but I noticed. The house was shedding her like old paint, and no one seemed to notice except me. That evening, at dinner, Avery was halfway through a chicken drumstick when he said, Mom said Grandpa's moving out soon so I can have his room. Marla's fork clinked against her wine glass. She coughed, wiped her mouth, and kept her eyes down. Lowell didn't even pretend to be surprised. He just cleared his throat and muttered, Let's just eat. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't demand the truth. But I committed the silence to memory, the exact tone, the avoidance, the discomfort that hung heavier than the food. The next morning, after the dishes were cleared and Marla took Emmeline and Avery to a community arts fair, I walked out to the backyard. The garden was in rough shape. Weeds had crept into the beds where Alta once grew peonies and hydrangeas. She'd left behind a chart on when to prune, when to fertilize. Marla said she'd re-landscape it soon. I hadn't seen a shovel touch soil since. I made my way to the elm tree. The bark was thicker now, the roots wider, but it was still the same tree we danced under in the rain one summer evening, years ago, when Emmeline was still in diapers and Alta's knees didn't ache. I sat on the bench, her bench, where she used to read aloud from mystery novels, pausing dramatically before turning each page. The wind shifted, and for a second, I could almost hear her. I gave them my roots, I thought. And they're already trimming the branches. As I stood to head back inside, something caught my eye, something glinting faintly near the side of the garage. A manila folder sat askew in the trash bin. I pulled it out. Interior renovation, final phase, read the label in Marla's handwriting. I didn't open it, not because I was afraid of what I'd find. I already knew. I just wasn't ready to let the illusion of next time die. Not yet. The walk home was shorter than I remembered. Maybe my legs moved faster because my mind didn't. I turned the corner past Maple Street and cut through the alley behind the house, hoping to come in quietly. But as I stepped onto the porch and reached for the knob to my room, nothing. It wouldn't budge. I tried again, twisting left, then right. It was locked. And taped across the wood was a white sticker I hadn't seen before. Private, under renovation. The words were printed in bold sans serif, impersonal as a motel receipt. From inside came the faint sound of a drill, followed by humming, someone else's, not mine. It didn't sound like maintenance. It sounded like territory being claimed. Marla's voice broke through from the hallway. Oh, they must have started while you were out. We planned to refinish your space, just paint and shelves. Nothing major. They thought you'd be okay with it. I looked at her and gave a nod I didn't feel. Sure, I said, turning back down the hall. The house suddenly felt larger than it should have, like there were more walls than before. That night at dinner, Marla passed the salad bowl like she was passing a verdict. Her voice was soft, rehearsed. Would you consider letting us set you up in a guest apartment downtown, just temporarily? It'd be easier for you. Lowell chimed in, never quite looking at me. Elevator access, no stairs, and you'd have your own space, privacy, just until we finish things here. He didn't blink. He didn't fidget. That kind of calm only comes from someone who knows the outcome is already decided. Across the table, Emmeline stared at her mashed potatoes. She didn't raise her head, didn't speak. I nodded again, not out of agreement, but because saying anything would have cost more than staying quiet. The sound of silverware took over the room, scraping ceramic like it was sandpaper on stone. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I grabbed my coat and walked the block, just once, letting the cold air find the parts of me that were still awake. From the sidewalk, I looked up at the house. All the lights were on. The living room glowed a pale yellow, and my room, my former room, shone brightest. Through the sheer curtains, I could make out boxes, drop cloths, a ladder propped at an angle. It looked like a showroom, not a room that ever smelled of books or held the creak of an old chair. Not a room that knew how often I read until sunrise when Alta was in the hospital, or where I paced during the night Emmeline had her fever. A room, I thought, is never just four walls. It remembers. But now I was just a man on the sidewalk, watching his own life being renovated into someone else's project. I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I stayed in the living room and reached for the top shelf of the bookcase. Behind the row of mystery novels Alta used to read was her journal, bound in deep brown leather, worn at the edges. I opened it and flipped through until I found the page with her handwriting dated May 12th. "We build homes not with brick," she had written, "but with memory." I closed the book slowly, then reopened it to the next blank page. I took a pen and, with steadier hands than I expected, wrote, "And they undo homes not with hammers, but with consent." Just upstairs, I could hear Lowell and Marla laughing with someone, maybe the designer. The floor creaked above me in rhythms I no longer recognized. Before the sun rose, I found an old moving box in the garage. I brought it inside, careful not to make noise. It wasn't surrender, not yet. It was something else, readiness, or maybe respect, not for them, but for the things I still claimed as mine. One box, enough to hold the unerasable, Alta's journal, a photo of us by the elm, my father's watch, a dog-eared paperback with my notes in the margins. I closed the box gently, in the quiet. It made more sound than I intended, but no one stirred. Dinner smelled of ambition and garlic bread. Marla had gone all out, table set with cloth napkins, flickering tea lights, and mismatched wine glasses she insisted were eclectic. I watched from the hallway, unsure if I was a guest or an obstacle. Two of her interior design clients sat laughing with a local realtor, sipping Chardonnay and talking about lakefront properties like they were discussing weekend errands. Lowell moved fluidly around the room, refilling glasses, hosting. I stepped in quietly and took a seat near the far end, close to the sideboard. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I was curious, maybe even hopeful, but I wasn't blind. Midway through a story about backsplash tiles, one of the women gestured toward me. "So he's your tenant?" she asked, smiling like she already knew the answer. Marla laughed, brushing it off with a practiced ease. "Oh, just family. He's staying with us temporarily until the renovation clears up." The word "just" hung in the air like cologne. Nobody corrected her. Nobody blinked. I nodded once, picked up a cracker from the edge of the cheese board, and placed it back down untouched. Later, after the guests had gone, the family dinner resumed in a smaller, quieter circle. Emmeline played with the edge of her napkin, then said carefully, "My friend Natalie thought you lived in a care home. Grandpa." Marla gave a tight smile. "Well, kids make things up." Avery chimed in between bites. "But aren't we getting Grandpa's room soon?" My chair creaked as I shifted. I said nothing. Afterwards, I went to check the study. The doorway was half blocked by moving boxes. Inside, my bookshelves had been emptied. Labeled cardboard stood like tombstones. One read, "Attic." Another, "Donate?" A smaller box bore a sticker in Marla's handwriting. Non-essential legacy items. I ran my fingers across the spines of boxed books I'd once lectured from. Histories, memoirs, lives that mattered. No one had asked me about any of it. In the kitchen, as I prepared tea, Lowell wandered in. "We didn't mean to upset you, Dad. We just want to make the house more livable." "For whom?" I asked, not looking up. He hesitated. "Emmeline needs space. Marla's expanding her office." He poured himself water. "It's a house, Dad. Bricks and wood. Don't be so sentimental." "Bricks and wood don't remember your bedtime stories," I said, voice calm but heavy. That night, I set 3 books beside my bed, ones I wouldn't trust to a donation bin. I turned the lock on my door for the first time in years. The house was no longer mine, but the silence, my silence, still was. I stayed up long after everyone else had gone to bed. The walls felt closer than usual. I sat in the dark living room, letting the shadows stretch across the floor like time itself. Every groove in the wood paneling reminded me of Alta's slipper shuffle and the soft thud of her mug on the end table. I could almost hear her hum from the kitchen, mixing sugar into her coffee. But tonight, that space felt hollow, repurposed, not by time, but by strategy. When Emmeline came downstairs to get water, she paused at the bottom step, watching me from the corner. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered. "About the care house. I told Natalie you live here. With us." "With us," I echoed. "That's kind of you." She shifted uncomfortably and nodded, then tiptoed back upstairs. I turned toward the bookshelf and ran my hand over a photo of my first lecture class. Young faces, eager and idealistic. They had called me Professor O back then. That title meant more than just tenure. It meant belonging. It meant being heard. Now, even my name had begun to fade from the documents. Electric bills redirected. Insurance letters no longer listed me as primary. One envelope last week simply said, "Current occupant." The past week I had spent shrinking in a house I built with decades of care. Now it was being reshaped without ceremony. Their blueprint didn't have room for memory. I looked around my room, smaller now, it seemed. I walked to the drawer beside the bed and pulled out an old notebook. Its pages were lined with scribbles about American wars and peace accords, but I flipped past those. On the last page, I wrote, "This silence will not be permanent. This silence remembers." Some lines in history books are marked not by their length, but by their refusal to vanish. As I turned off the lamp and lay in bed, I listened, not for footsteps, not for apologies, but for the stillness that settles when truth finally gets tired of knocking. That night, I slept with the door locked, 3 books by my pillow, and a slow-burning awareness that silence, when wielded well, isn't surrender, it's preparation. Emmeline knocked gently on the doorframe before stepping in, her eyes wide with hesitation, but her tablet held out like a peace offering. "Grandpa, my teacher said we have to finish our civics project by tomorrow. Will you help me?" I folded the corner of my newspaper and patted the cushion next to me. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's see what's puzzling the next generation." She sat down with all the energy of a hummingbird, flipping through browser tabs, talking about branches of government, while I listened half-heartedly until something flashed across the top of her screen. Just a flicker, gone in a second. A subject line. "Timeline. Move Dad out before spring open house." The sender? Marla. I didn't say anything. My jaw tightened. Emmeline kept clicking. "Is the Supreme Court more powerful than Congress?" I nodded slowly, answering in a voice I barely recognized. But my mind was already gone from the civics lesson. Gone from the branches of government and deep into the roots of this house, Alta's laughter, the scratch of the elm tree on our window during spring storms, the porch paint we chose together. She packed up her things and gave me a hug before running off. I stayed seated, staring at the grain in the wood floor as if it would answer what I hadn't dared ask. Was there truly a date, an actual deadline, for erasing me? That afternoon, while I was watering the garden's edge, Lowell approached slowly like a man delivering a verdict. "Dad," he began, holding a folder tight against his chest. "I wanted to show you this before Marla mentions it." He opened the folder and slid a packet toward me on the patio table. The pages were thick, clean, and filled with careful language. It wasn't a brochure, it was a contract. "It's a place near the park," he said quickly. "Sunrise Oaks, elevator access, your own space, just until the renovation's over. You deserve comfort." He waited, as if I'd say thank you. I didn't touch the papers. "And if I don't sign it?" Lowell cleared his throat. "Then," the lawyer advised, "you might be seen as a non-cooperative occupant. There could be consequences." I stared at him. My own son. This wasn't concern, it was packaging. A relocation wrapped in soft words and sharp terms. My refusal wasn't rebellion, it was suddenly non-compliance. He left the folder. I left it unopened. Later that evening, I brewed tea with shaking hands. The folder sat where he left it, whispering. I opened it. I read slowly, like I was translating a foreign language I used to know. Legalese that once protected families, now used to pry them apart. Supervised transition. Limited access. Final design control reserved. One clause used the phrase legacy content subject to evaluation. My life. Boxed. Labeled. Reviewed. There was even a timeline. Weeks. Not months. I folded the pages, hands firm despite the tremor in my chest. It wasn't a contract. It was an obituary, written in polite font. The next morning, I slipped out early, drove the familiar route past the bakery Alta loved, past the corner where Emmeline learned to bike. I parked outside Kent's office with the same tightness in my chest I felt the day we filed her will. Kent took one look at the folder and exhaled hard. They're walking a legal tightrope, but they're leaning on emotional pressure more than statutes. He pulled out our original agreement. The clause about lifetime residence still stood, clear, solid, unambiguous. They can't void it with suggestion. They need your consent, he said. We made notes. He drafted a formal response. Carefully worded, but firm. I initialed where needed, signed where required. Kent looked at me for a long moment. You know this might cause a rupture, Orville. I looked out the window. It's already cracked. This is just putting markers on the fracture. When I left, the wind felt colder than it had in weeks. That night, I sat in the guest room, my supposed sanctuary, my downgraded domain, upstairs. Laughter trickled like rain against a tin roof. Marla's voice, high and rehearsed. Lowell's deeper chuckle. I stared at the wall where Alta's quilt once hung, now bare. I remembered the promise, nothing will change, made in daylight and revoked in shadow. I opened my journal and added a new line beneath Alta's handwriting. Today, they crossed the line. Then I closed it, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark, waiting, not for them, but for what I would do next. I still remember the moment I handed that signed contract back to Lowell, the one I refused. A few days have passed since then, and the tension in the house is thick. This is how it unfolded. In the kitchen that morning, I found myself pouring coffee just as Marla and the plumbing contractor talked over pipes and faucets. The young man looked up, paused, then said, "Oh, I thought no one lived here anymore. Sorry, sir." Marla's shoulders stiffened when he said it, but she didn't correct him. I stayed silent, went on making my coffee with measured calm. His assumption that I no longer belonged here, it's no longer strange, even from a stranger's mouth. That moment stung more than I'd expected. That evening, I wandered to the dining room. The table sat four: Lowell, Marla, Emmeline, and Avery had already started dinner in the newly redone kitchen space. My plate was tucked beneath a foil-covered dish, placed forlornly on a tray near the microwave. They left me to eat alone in the den. Through the doorway, I watched shadows drift across the wall that once held family photos. It felt like I'd been edited out of my own life. I ate in silence, the tinny hum of the microwave my only company. Exclusion was a quiet but unmistakable message. Later, I found Lowell in the garage, adjusting tools. I approached and said plainly, "You didn't even ask if I'd be joining dinner tonight." He didn't look at me immediately. When he finally spoke, the words came lightly. "We figured you wanted space. You've been quiet lately." I nodded slowly. Sadness huddled in my chest. Then said, "Silence isn't absence." He didn't reply and walked off without another word. It was our confrontation, quiet but urgent. The next day, Dwayne stopped by. We sat in the living room with coffee steaming in front of us. I let the day's incidents spill out. The contractor assuming I was gone, the empty seat at dinner, the sealed-away plate, the contract I refused. Dwayne listened without interrupting. Then he leaned back and said quietly, "They want you out. And they want you out quietly." His words landed like a hammer. He suggested I begin documenting everything, who said what, when, gathering copies of the unsigned changes, preserving proof of my original rights here. His calm honesty cut through the fog. That night I locked the study door. I sat at the desk under lamplight and opened a manila folder. I cataloged names, dates, conversations. I included a copy of the lifetime residency clause from the original agreement, the unsigned contract page, my notes on contractor comments and dinner seating. I placed them carefully inside a file labeled, "For when they say it never happened." When it was done, I sat back and exhaled, piece by piece. I was building my defense, not with anger, but with clarity. My silence would hold weight if they tried to dismiss me again. I can still see the envelope, plain, unmarked, lying on the kitchen counter. No name, no warmth, just the words "Final Move Notice." I paused, the drip of the coffee maker echoing in the empty morning. It ordered me, "Vacate the premises by April 7th for renovations." No signature, no apology. It wasn't a request anymore, it was a command. I set it aside without a reaction and quietly walked to my study, steadying the tremor in my hands. Once inside the study, I sat at the old mahogany desk, the envelope placed beside my usual writing pad. My mind sifted through memories of Alta's household ledger tucked in that drawer beneath the desk. I opened the drawer, and there it was, the notebook Alta kept, pages yellowed with her neat handwriting. When I skimmed through, a photocopy slipped out, a loan document for $150,000, secured by primary residence. The date, just 3 days after I signed the deed transfer, they had mortgaged the house behind my back. That evening, I called Lowell and Marla into the study. The house smelled faintly of polish. I laid the photocopy on the desk. "When were you going to tell me you borrowed against my home?" I asked, voice even. Lowell sighed, shifting his weight. He said it was temporary, necessary to float Marla's project until their buyer came through. Then I asked, "So you risked the roof over my head for a redesign you haven't paid for?" Marla interrupted. "It's our house now." I answered softly, "Not morally." The air hung heavy. They both went silent, understanding the weight of what had been done. Moments after they left, Emmeline passed the open door. She hesitated, then looked back at me. Her face wasn't puzzled, but full of understanding, clarity I hadn't expected so soon. I didn't speak. Our eyes met, and I saw shame there. Quiet, but certain. It was the first time I felt a real shift, as if the house remembered itself again through her. That night I sat in the guest bedroom lamp-lit corner. I pulled out stationery and began writing to Kent, my lawyer. The note began simply, "This is my formal record of coercion and betrayal." My hand paused only once, when I recalled Lowell's earlier words, "Nothing will change." Now everything had. I sealed that letter and laid it beside my bed. The line was drawn. I still feel the tension in the air from the study that evening. The unspoken truths, laid bare. 2 days later, I found myself in the auditorium for Emmeline's school recital. My heart lifted when she took the stage, childhood notes and practiced lines, and yet, when the event wrapped up and the slideshow began, under her name it read, "Thanks to Mom, Dad." No mention of Grandpa, even though I'd helped her rehearse every evening after school. Later, a teacher approached me with a polite but probing tone. "Didn't expect to see you here." I thought you'd moved out. Here I was, erased in her acknowledgement, and even among educators, my place in this home felt invisible, returning to a quiet house. I discovered a note pinned to the entryway bulletin board. It read, "To whom it may concern," and carried a moving company flyer, scheduled service date and new address included. No one had said a word. I walked into the living room, where Marla was examining a series of design mock-ups on her tablet. She didn't mention the note or glance up. I didn't ask. I was too weary for another confrontation. Later that afternoon, my old friend Vernon showed up unexpectedly, grocery bags in hand. When I opened the front door, he looked stunned. "Wait, is this still your house? I thought you passed." His voice trembled. He'd heard from Lowell that I was no longer living here permanently, and assumed I'd been in hospice. Whispered rumors of my death, perhaps intentional, filled his eyes with genuine shock. He stepped inside slowly, silent, looking at me as if I were a ghost come back to reclaim life. That evening, Emmeline knocked softly on my guest room door. She looked timid, fidgeting with a small piece of paper. "I'm sorry they didn't put your name," she whispered, handing me a crayon-colored thank you note. "I tried." Then she turned and left quickly. Steps light. I held the note in my hands, feeling the honest strokes of a child's conscience. In private, I read her words, a simple drawing, and the words, "Grandpa helped me." It felt like quiet redemption, a green shoot after a long winter. Later, I sat at my desk in the dim lamplight, opening a fresh pad. I started to write, slowly at first, then more firmly. At the top, Chronicle of Displacement, a first-hand account. I wrote names and dates, events both small and painful. I traced the erasures, the missing acknowledgments, the unspoken schedule of departure, the rumor that I was gone. These pages would be my legacy, not built on family pictures or glossy photographs, but on ink and memory. My voice may have been silenced in public, but not in that notebook. I'll see that someone, lawyer, friends, my grandchildren, reads it someday. They'll know where I stood, and why I chose to rise again, even when broken glass lay scattered all around me. I could still see the faint glow of Emmeline's crayon drawing beside my bed, the note she slipped me in kindness. A week later, I wandered into the living room and noticed the portrait of Alta, my late wife, that had hung over the fireplace for decades was gone. In its place, a sleek metal sculpture shimmered under new spotlights. Marla called it forward-thinking energy. The sculpture looked cold to me. The room felt empty without Alta's smiling face overseeing us. Around me, the family chatted about new wallpaper colors and lighting. They treated the house like a gallery. I stood in silence. So I escaped midday to the library. I needed air that didn't carry tension. The librarian greeted me. "Good morning, Orville," then added with a careful warmth, "Your son mentioned you're transitioning into full-time care." I nodded, smiled gently, and left soon after. Even among friends, my story was slipping away. The community, like the house, was rewriting my chapter without my consent. That evening, Lowell sat across from me in the den, glass of whiskey in hand. He looked tired. "You know, Dad, we're doing this for the family. You can't hold on to the past forever." He tapped the glass. His voice had that clipped tone, firm, convinced, but what he called family welfare, I heard as justifying betrayal. I replied, "You're right. But what you call the past is what I call life." He said nothing after that. For the first time, he didn't argue. The weight in his eyes spoke of something unspoken. A day later, Emmeline asked to borrow my old typewriter. She said simply, "I want to write a report on what makes a real home." She looked earnest, thoughtful. I hesitated, then pushed it toward her. I wondered what she might write. Maybe she was seeing more than I'd thought. That quiet bond felt like a small ache of hope. That night I began packing, a single suitcase. Nothing dramatic, just a few essentials. Not because I'm gone, yet, but because staying doesn't mean silence. My suitcase was a statement, My next move would echo beyond these walls and speak louder than code-worded contracts or erased portraits. I packed thinking, this is the first step away from being erased. I walked into Kent's law office, clutching the folder labeled Chronicle of Displacement, the papers heavy in my hands. I'd spent the morning rereading Emmeline's crayon letter, feeling more determined than ever. Kent took the folder and studied it quietly. Finally, he said, "This is enough." He tapped his pen thoughtfully and slid a fresh sheet across the desk. He wrote with precision. Then he looked up. "We can invoke the revocation clause buried in the deed, something Lowell assumed you'd forgotten." I blinked, remembering that long-ago signing. Kent continued, "Once we file, you can rescind the gift if there's proof of coercion or mistreatment." I felt a flicker of something like relief. The law was on my side, a hidden clause, but real power. That evening, Lowell and Marla had arranged a dinner with potential buyers under the new lighting and polished surfaces. I arrived at the dining table holding Kent's letter in my fist. The moment Marla saw me, she froze mid-pour. I looked at the investors' expectant faces, quietly, for the children to hear. I read aloud, "There was a time when I believed love was protection enough, but paper matters." I slid the letter across the table to Lowell. One line on law office of Kent Winchell's letterhead. Marla's eyes widened. The buyers excused themselves in awkward silence. Lowell tried to speak, but no words seemed adequate. A tense stillness followed. Lowell said, "It's too late to do anything now, Dad." Marla leaned forward. "You'll regret this. You can't make threats when everything's already signed." I set my gaze on little Emmeline, then on Avery, fumbling with his phone. I stayed calm. "You may remodel the house," I told them, voice even, "but you'll never live peacefully in what you stole." That silence pressed harder than any argument. Later, I stepped into the garden. Kent's assistant called on my cell to confirm the motion had been filed with the county clerk. She said, "It might take weeks, maybe months, but it's active." I exhaled and let the air in my chest ease. No triumph, just resolve. Justice now moves with procedure, not force. That night I returned inside quietly. I walked past the dining room, empty now, and into the hall. For weeks I had left the hallway light burning, afraid of the dark reflecting fears. But tonight I switched it off. In the study I replaced Alta's portrait where it belonged above the fireplace. No objections this time. The room breathed differently, something stronger, steadier. I locked the door gently behind me. As I placed my hand on the familiar frame, I realized the weight of one signature could ripple outward, not just legal power, but affirmation of self-worth. Paper might hold the deed, but dignity anchors the house. I sat down at my desk and let the hush settle. The reverberations have only just begun. I'd been waiting 2 full weeks since Kent filed the motion. Finally. A crisp envelope from the county clerk lay on my doorknob. Inside was official notice. A temporary injunction had been approved. No alterations, no sales. The house was frozen until a full hearing. The legal system, silent until now, had spoken in my favor. I placed the letter on the mantel beside Alta's portrait and felt something shift. Not triumph exactly, but confirmation that truth mattered. Later that morning, I walked through the kitchen. The decorative pieces Marla insisted on were gone, the countertops cleared. They'd moved out quietly the night before. No note, no goodbye. My eyes drifted to the refrigerator door. Emmeline's apology note, taped there still. Its colors hadn't faded. The silence that filled the room didn't sting. It felt clean, as if the mess of betrayal had been finally carried away. Saturday came with a knock at the front door. Emmeline stood there, her backpack slung over her shoulder. She didn't say much, just, "Can I stay a while?" I opened the door, stepped aside, and let her in. She paused in the hallway, then spotted the typewriter on the shelf. "I want to finish the report," she said. I hesitated, then nodded and handed it to her. In that small gesture, our bond found its name, truth. Together we sat in the living room, windows open to a breezy Iowa morning, and watched pages fill with questions only she could ask, and answers we could find together. A few days later, I sat down to write a guest column for the local paper. The headline formed in my mind first. When a home becomes a battlefield, dignity is the first casualty. I wrote using just Orville, grandfather. No Dr. Harrell, no formal title. When it ran, the response surprised me. The modest piece went viral online among our small community. Seniors wrote in emails and letters, stories of being overlooked, displaced, worn down. People I'd seen at the library or farmer's market shared their own regrets or fears. Support poured in across lines I hadn't realized existed. A week passed and I spent early morning hours in the garden under the old oak. I dug small holes for tulip bulbs and planted them carefully. As I covered each bulb with earth, I whispered, not for the first time, for Alta, for Emmeline, for those who refuse to be erased. The sun warmed my back. I turned toward the house, windows still intact, door still standing. I was still here, the home was still standing, and so was I.